My name is Angela, 30 years old. At my wedding, my sister tossed the drink at me and said, "Here's to the family fraud in white." My mom rushed to her, saying, "She didn't mean it." I didn't respond. That night, I froze the shared bank account. But at 8:40 a.m., they got the real news. The university had withdrawn her enrollment. Payment failed. My mom called screaming. Everything was perfect until my sister Alyssa walked in. There was this incredible atmosphere, soft, glowing, almost cinematic, the kind of warmth you can feel in your chest when you realize a room full of people is genuinely happy for you. Not polite happy, not forced smiles, but the kind of happy that comes from knowing you've earned something and you're finally being allowed to hold it. The ceremony had gone flawlessly. My husband looked breathtaking, the lights catching the edges of his expression every time he smiled at me, and for once in a very long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Then she arrived late, loud, and wrapped in white. Not off-white, not champagne or pearl, not something you could excuse as a misunderstanding. No, a wedding white dress, long and dramatic, the kind of dress you choose when you want eyes to snap to you the second you enter. She didn't care. She never does. Alyssa walked in like the whole day had been about her, like the aisle and the vows and the music were just background for her entrance. And somehow, without saying anything at first, she sucked the energy out of the room. Even the music felt like it dipped for a second. People stared. Someone actually turned to me and asked if it was a joke. And still, we pretended we had to. My husband didn't deserve to have his night hijacked by my sister's theatrics. I kept glancing at him, half expecting him to cry or get upset, but he didn't. He just smiled at people, held my hand, and kept the vibe alive like the absolute king he is. That made it worse for me, knowing how much effort he was putting in to pretend Alyssa didn't exist. So I matched it. I laughed when I was supposed to. I danced. I thanked guests. I posed for photos I didn't want to be in anymore. All of it felt like walking on glass. What was supposed to be the happiest night of our lives turned into this quiet, emotional endurance test because Alyssa made sure we had to act like nothing happened, and we all knew it. We got through dinner, through the dances, through the speeches. People kept asking if I was okay, some of them noticing, some just guessing something was off. I shrugged them off. I wasn't about to let Alyssa win by turning the night into a mess, but she didn't need a full hour. She only needed 10 seconds. Near the end of the reception, just as things started to feel normal again, Alyssa stood up from her seat with a glass of red wine. The music was low. Everyone was laughing. A few guests were still making spontaneous toasts. I thought maybe, just maybe, she was going to try and smooth it over, pretend to be gracious for the sake of appearances. Instead, she turned to my husband, not me, and said, "Here's to the family fraud in white." And before anyone could react, she tossed the wine. She didn't aim for him, she aimed for me. It hit full on. Dark red splashed across my white shirt, soaking through my jacket, dripping down like a bruise that wouldn't stop spreading. It was so fast, so deliberate that people didn't even process it right away. My uncle actually laughed, thinking it was a joke before realizing it wasn't. Then silence. A few people stood. One of my husband's cousins dropped his glass, and my mother, God help me, ran toward Alyssa, grabbing her by the arm, muttering frantically, "She didn't mean it." Of course she meant it. Alyssa never lets her anger sit quietly. She always burns the whole room just to feel like she's the one standing on the ashes. I didn't say a word. Not to her, not to my mom, not to anyone. I just walked away, cleaned up, changed into the backup clothes I had stored just in case something happened. Not for this. Just for a spill or accident or maybe sweat. Not this. And then I came back out smiling again, pretending again, because my husband deserved to remember the night as perfect, no matter how badly my sister tried to poison it. But inside, I made a decision. That was the last time Alyssa would ever humiliate me. After everyone left, after the venue cleared and my husband fell asleep beside me, still glowing, still happy, I stayed up. I logged into the shared bank account, the one Alyssa had access to, the one I had funded for months for tuition, rent, emergencies, everything. The account that kept her life from falling apart while she played at being a victim. I froze it, locked it all down. No warning, no heads up. At 8:40 a.m., her school emailed her. Final payment bounced. Enrollment withdrawn. At 8:41, my phone rang. It was my mother screaming. I didn't answer the call, not right away. I watched it ring while I sat at the kitchen counter sipping coffee. My husband was still asleep upstairs, and I didn't want to bring this chaos into our first full day as a married couple. The moment I picked up, it would start. The questions, the guilt tripping, the fake concern layered over rage. My mom would start with how devastated Alyssa was, then pivot to how I had overreacted. That's how it always went. So I let it go to voicemail. Then she called again and again. By the fifth missed call, a text came through, one sentence. Ask her, "What did you do to your sister?" As if I had done something. I responded with a single word, nothing. Because I really hadn't, not until now. And even this didn't feel like revenge. It felt like correction. For too long, I had bent over backward to keep Alyssa's life from crumbling. She blew her savings last year on some pyramid scheme her friend got her into. I bailed her out. She missed the grant deadline for school. I covered tuition. She crashed her car and didn't have insurance. I helped her find a rental. She never said thank you, just acted like it was owed to her. But what she did at the wedding, that crossed into something else. And for once, I let her deal with consequences. By noon, my dad called too. Unlike my mom, he wasn't dramatic, but he was blunt. He asked me if I understood how serious this was, that Alyssa had no way to fix this now, that the university wouldn't make exceptions because her sister was being petty, that she might lose the entire semester, possibly the year. I said, "Good." Silence on the line. Then he said something like, "You don't mean that." And I just told him he clearly didn't know me very well. That was the moment it started to shift. Because for years they'd seen me as the one who could absorb everything, the one who never lost control, who always paid, always forgave, always kept peace, and they depended on that. They built their comfort on that, on me. Now I was the problem, but they didn't know the half of it because freezing the account, that was just the start. Later that afternoon, I logged into the insurance portal and removed her from the health plan I'd added her to. She never paid a dime for it, and it was only supposed to be temporary, just until she got on her feet. She'd been on it for almost 2 years. Quietly, I shut that door too. Then I went into the student loan portal, the one tied to my name, and changed the automatic payments I'd set up for her minimums. Canceled them. They default within a month unless she stepped in. I didn't say a word to Alyssa, and I didn't post about it online. I didn't make a scene or try to embarrass her the way she had me. I just let the ground beneath her quietly fall away. Because here's what no one in the family wanted to admit. Alyssa's entire stability came from me. Every good thing she had was either inherited from someone else's grace or bailed out when she messed it up. And when she decided to humiliate me at the one moment in my life that was supposed to be sacred, that was her cashing out the last of her credit. That night at dinner, my husband asked if I wanted to talk about what happened. I told him everything was already handled. He didn't ask for details, but he smiled a little, like he understood the shape of what I was doing without needing the numbers. The next 2 days were quiet. Too quiet. No more screaming calls, no dramatic voicemails, just silence, which was almost worse because I knew what that meant. They were regrouping, trying to figure out how to spin it, how to get me back in line. I'd gone off script. That scared them more than anything. But the silence didn't last. By day 3, it began. It started small, like they were testing the temperature before they reached for the flame. My mom texted me a photo of Alyssa's old acceptance letter, as if an email from years ago could rewrite what she did at my wedding. Then came a message about how people make mistakes, how stress affects people in different ways, and how weddings can be emotional. No mention of the wine, no apology, just passive phrases orbiting around what happened like it was weather, unavoidable, and nobody's fault. I ignored it. I had learned a long time ago that if you respond too early, they treat it like permission. Permission to argue, permission to guilt you, permission to twist your silence into surrender. Then she escalated. She messaged my husband on Instagram. That was new. That was her stepping into territory she'd never dared to cross before because she knew it would trigger something protective in me, something desperate to keep my mess away from him. She called me controlling. She implied I was punishing Alyssa because I liked having power. She didn't say it directly, but the subtext was loud, like she wanted him to look at me and wonder if this is who you married. My husband read it out loud while we were brushing our teeth. We both stared at each other in the mirror for a beat, and then we laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so obvious. They weren't trying to fix what Alyssa did. They were trying to shame me back into compliance. I finally texted my mom one sentence. If she apologizes directly to my husband, I'll consider talking. No reply. Because Alyssa doesn't apologize. Not when she's wrong, and definitely not to a man she thinks she can dismiss as an accessory in my life. That's when the cousin brigade came. Texts from people I hadn't spoken to in years, long messages with fake warmth like, "Hey girl, haven't talked in a while, but I just wanted to say," and then a paragraph about family being everything and how Alyssa always looked up to me and how this was just a bad moment, a misunderstanding, a misstep. One even wrote, "You know how she is. You're the stable one. We're counting on you to pull this back together." You're the stable one. That line made my jaw tighten so hard it hurt. Because yeah, I've always been the stable one. The one who shows up, pays on time, fixes what breaks, swallows insults for the sake of peace. And they expected me to do it again, like clockwork, like a job I never applied for but somehow inherited. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I started moving quietly, the way you do when you're tired of arguing with people who only hear what benefits them. I called the university and confirmed what I already knew. Her place was gone. The final payment deadline had passed. Her spot had been offered to the next person on the list. Then I found out something else, something no one in my family seemed to understand yet. Her campus housing was tied to enrollment, which meant she had 2 weeks to vacate. She hadn't told them that. I waited. On the 6th day after the wedding, I got the first message from Alyssa herself. Just a thumbs up emoji. That was it. No words, no apology, just a thumbs up like the chaos she unleashed was a joke, like her life unraveling was still beneath her, still somehow my fault. I didn't respond, but I knew what was coming because Alyssa doesn't change when she's confronted. She changes when she's cornered. Day 7, 1 week after the wedding, the first call from her finally came through. I let it go to voicemail. I wanted to hear what tone she'd use when she couldn't perform for anyone. She didn't disappoint. There was no apology, no mention of the wine. She said she heard the account got frozen and there must be some kind of glitch. She said the rent office at her student housing was being weird and asked me to clear it up real quick, like we were business partners, like I was her assistant, like I was still the same sister who would fix everything with a sigh and a transfer. The next morning she texted, "They're telling me I have to move out by Friday. Seriously, you're going to let that happen?" Yes, I was. My husband watched all of it unfold with this calm that steadied me. He didn't tell me what to do. He didn't push revenge. He didn't beg for peace. He just stayed close, like he understood that what I was doing wasn't cruelty. It was survival, the kind that comes from finally refusing to be used. Then Alyssa did something that made me realize she wasn't just angry. She was strategic. She posted a photo on Instagram, not one of those vague quotes people use when they're spiraling. She was smiling, holding a glass of wine again, the caption dripping with smugness about pretending, and she tagged me. She wanted people to see it. She wanted the story to tilt. She wanted me to look petty, heartless, cold, like I was ruining her life over one little moment. A few hours later, I got a DM from a former coworker. "Hey, saw your sister's post. Everything okay?" That's when something in me flipped. Not loud, not dramatic, just a clean internal switch. Because now she wasn't just trying to punish me privately, she was trying to control my reputation, to turn my boundary into a scandal. So I did something she never saw coming. I contacted the scholarship foundation she'd been bragging about all year, the one she applied to last minute after I nudged her through the process. What she didn't know was that my letter of support helped push it through. I vouched for her stability, her maturity, her character, words that tasted bitter in my mouth now. I emailed them and withdrew my endorsement. I didn't lie. I didn't rant. I simply attached a copy of the university's withdrawal notice and told them I could no longer support her participation in the program. They asked a few questions. I answered politely, professionally, like I was closing a file. By the next afternoon, she was dropped from the scholarship too. She called me 3 times back to back. This time, I picked up. She didn't even try to mask the panic. She said I ruined her future. She said I was jealous of her potential. She said she had real plans and everything was falling apart because I was vindictive. I didn't say much at first. I let her hear my silence, the kind that makes people talk faster, reveal more. Then she asked what it would take. Money. A public apology from me letting her post something for clarity so she could save face. She was negotiating like this was a business transaction, like she hadn't spilled wine on me in front of everyone I loved. I told her there was nothing she could offer. "You're not serious," she snapped. "This is your sister." "Yeah," I said, voice flat. That used to mean something. Then I hung up. By Friday, she was officially out of the dorms. My mom tried again that weekend, sending a photo of Alyssa sitting on a friend's couch with her belongings stuffed into trash bags like she was the victim in some sad movie. But my eyes caught something in the background that made my stomach twist. One of the boxes had my handwriting on it, from last year, a label I'd written when I packed her stuff, folded her clothes, made sure she'd have everything she needed to start over. I stared at that photo longer than I should have, not because I felt guilty, but because I finally saw the truth in one frame. How much of my life had gone into holding hers together. How invisible my effort had been to everyone who benefited from it. Not anymore. By the end of that week, it wasn't just Alyssa unraveling, it was the whole family. Group texts reignited after a year of silence, full of vague check-ins and thinking of you messages that weren't fooling anyone. Then the real tone slipped in. Family is all we have. Maybe there's a way to meet halfway. My aunt chimed in and called what I was doing extreme. Extreme. No one called it extreme when I paid for Alyssa's groceries after she maxed her card on nonsense. No one called it extreme when she sabotaged my milestones with a smile. No one had words for all the ways I'd been expected to swallow. But the second I stopped protecting her, suddenly I was the villain. That's when it sank in. This wasn't about fairness. It was about the system. Alyssa was the unstable one, the one people worried about, catered to, forgave. I was the responsible one, the safety net, and I had cut the net. Now the structure was shaking, and they didn't know who they were without me holding it up. My dad finally texted me privately. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He asked one question. "Do you want a relationship with your family or not?" That hit harder than I expected, because for the first time, I had to admit what this might cost long term. But the moment I read it, I realized something cold and clear. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted reset. Back to me paying, me fixing, me absorbing. And if I didn't agree, then I was the problem. So I answered honestly, "Not like this." He didn't reply. And the silence that followed didn't feel like peace. It felt like planning, like an inhale. Because Alyssa hadn't hit bottom yet. And when she did, I knew she wouldn't fall quietly. 3 weeks passed. No calls. No texts. No late-night voicemails filled with rage or fake apologies. Even Alyssa's social media went dark, like she dropped off the map entirely. The quiet was unsettling. I kept waiting for the next explosion, because with my family, silence never meant acceptance. It meant recalculation. Part of me thought she'd left town, bounced to another friend's couch, found a new soft landing. That's how it always went. Someone else would step in, and the cycle would reset. But that wasn't what happened. On a random Tuesday morning, my husband was working from home when there was a knock at the door. He answered it before I could even ask who it was. I heard his voice change, drop into something cautious, and then he called my name quietly, the way you do when you know something is about to shift the air in the room. Standing in the hallway was his ex-girlfriend. I barely recognized her. She looked thinner than the last time I'd seen her, her face tired in a way makeup couldn't hide. She said she didn't want drama, didn't want to cause problems. She said she just needed to tell us something, and then she'd leave. My instincts went rigid immediately. People don't show up like that unless they're carrying something heavy. She told us she'd run into Alyssa 2 nights earlier. Alyssa was staying in a pay-by-the-week motel on the edge of town. That alone should have shocked me, but I didn't feel anything yet. Then she took a breath and said the words that made my stomach drop. Alyssa said she was pregnant. I didn't react at first. I just stood there, my mind refusing to snap into place around the idea. Pregnancy is one of those words that carries weight even when it's spoken softly. My husband went still beside me. His ex-girlfriend reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the kind you get handed in a small clinic waiting room. No letterhead, no flourish. Pregnancy confirmed. 6 weeks. She said Alyssa hadn't asked her for money or help. She said Alyssa just needed to tell someone, and that before she left, she said something that stuck. She said I was still the only person who had ever really taken care of her, and that she knew she'd ruined it. Then she handed me the paper like it was something she didn't want to touch anymore, and left without asking a single question. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the confirmation. I waited for guilt. I waited for panic. I waited for the familiar pull to fix it. None of it came. What I felt instead was a strange, quiet clarity. Because now I knew this wasn't about tuition or wine or scholarships. Alyssa's entire life was unraveling, and for the first time, she wasn't performing it loudly. She was spiraling in silence. My husband sat next to me and didn't say a word. He didn't need to. We both understood that whatever this was, it wasn't ours to manage. Not anymore. I didn't tell my parents. Not that day, not the next, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I was done being the messenger, the translator, the absorber of every crisis. They would find out on their own, and they would deal with it without my buffer. 2 days later, Alyssa showed up at my apartment. I didn't answer the door. I watched her through the peephole, arms crossed, posture stiff, still trying to look composed. She knocked twice, waited, checked her phone, knocked again. 12 minutes passed. Then she slid something under the door. A handwritten letter. I picked it up after she left. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even emotional. It was a list. Tuition totals, rent estimates, a timeline for stability until she could transfer credits. At the bottom, she wrote one line. I know you don't owe me this, but I'm asking anyway. That sentence stayed with me longer than the rest of the page, not because it was sincere, but because it was the first time she'd ever acknowledged the truth. She knew I didn't owe her anymore. I left the letter on the floor. I didn't respond. The next night, she finally told our mom everything. The enrollment loss, the eviction, the scholarship, all of it. My mom called me sobbing, not screaming this time. Her voice cracked in a way that sounded real. She said Alyssa was scared, that she'd never seen her like this, that I didn't understand how bad it was. I told her calmly that I understood exactly how bad it was. Then I said the sentence they never believed would come out of my mouth. I'm not helping her. Not this time. Not next time. Not ever again. My mom didn't argue. She just cried. Said something about how she didn't raise us to be this divided. I told her she raised us to believe I would always fix what Alyssa broke, and now she was seeing what happened when I didn't. Later that week, I got another letter from Alyssa. This one was shorter. No numbers, no demands. Just a few lines saying she got it now. That she knew I really wouldn't save her anymore, and that she didn't know what to do. It was the closest thing to accountability she'd ever shown me. I folded it and put it in a drawer. Not because I was sentimental, but because I wanted to remember this moment. People like Alyssa don't change when they hurt you. They change when you stop cushioning the fall. And I was done being the net. The drawer stayed closed for days. I didn't reread the letter. I didn't touch the clinic paper. I let them sit there like evidence in a case that wasn't mine anymore. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to Alyssa's chaos. I was letting it exist without absorbing it, and that alone felt like learning a new language. My parents found out 2 nights later, not from me. My mom called just after 10, her voice raw and hollow, like something inside her had finally cracked. She didn't say Alyssa's name at first. She just said, "She's staying at a motel." Then the rest spilled out. The eviction, the scholarship, the enrollment, the pregnancy. Every sentence sounded like a confession she'd been holding back for years, except this time there was no one left to blame but reality. She waited for me to say something, to step in, to do what I'd always done. I didn't. I told her I was sorry Alyssa was scared. I told her I hoped she was safe. And then I said nothing else. No plan, no offer, no quiet rescue tucked between the lines. My mom asked if I'd known. I said yes. She asked why I hadn't told them. I said because it wasn't my responsibility to manage everyone's emotions anymore. There was a long silence. Then my dad took the phone. He didn't yell. He didn't guilt me. He asked if I understood how serious this was, like he'd asked before, except this time his voice carried something new. Fear. He asked me what kind of sister lets things get this far. I answered honestly, the kind who finally stopped pretending she could fix someone who didn't want to change. He didn't argue. He just said, "We'll figure it out," and hung up. That was when it hit me. They were finally figuring it out without me. Alyssa didn't call. Not that night. Not the next morning. She didn't show up again. She didn't post. She didn't rage. The silence this time wasn't strategic. It was empty. And for the first time, I believe she understood that the net was really gone. A week passed, then another. Life, strangely, moved on. My husband and I settled into a rhythm that felt solid and calm. We cooked dinner together. We laughed about small things. We talked about the future without my family's chaos filling every pause. I realized how much space Alyssa had taken up in my head for years, how loud it had been before, and how quiet it felt now. One afternoon, my mom texted me a single sentence. She's starting counseling. I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I felt victorious, and not because I felt regret. I felt something steadier, distance. Whatever Alyssa did next, whether she changed or didn't, it wasn't tied to my sacrifice anymore. That night, I finally opened the drawer. I took out the clinic paper, folded now from being handled too much by too many people. I took out the letter with the list, and the second one, the closest thing to an apology she'd ever written. I didn't reread them. I just stacked them neatly and put them back. Some stories don't end with forgiveness or reunion. Some end with boundaries so firm they feel like loss, even when they're necessary. I still don't know what Alyssa's future looks like. I don't know if she'll finish school, or who the father is, or whether she'll ever truly take responsibility for the way she burns every room she enters. What I do know is that for the first time, her future isn't built on my exhaustion. People ask me sometimes if I regret it, if I wish I'd handled it differently, if I worry that one day I'll feel guilty for not stepping in when it mattered most. I don't, because what mattered most wasn't saving her again. It was finally saving myself and protecting the life I chose, the marriage I fought to keep sacred, and the version of me that no longer confuses love with sacrifice. I didn't destroy my family. I stopped letting them destroy me.